custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Thank you so much for coming down. Everyone, if we can just squish in, there's lots of sitting spaces on the stairs as well if you want to come around, so your legs don't get tired. But don't block the pathway because we'll get the people from inside coming out, so we all have to make sure we're not blocking the pathway, so they'll let us continue to do protests like this in South Australia. Whole other topic though, isn't it? I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for coming and in supporting this important event, dedicated to recognising the immense contributions of brave whistleblowers and those courageous people associated with helping them share their stories. I don't think we could acknowledge World Whistleblower Day without remembering the bravery and important work of people like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and of course the great work of the late Daniel Ellsberg, who up to his last days, thank you, yeah, a round of applause. Who up until his last days was a huge advocate for free speech, free press, and a lasting and enduring friendship with Australian political prisoner and Walkley Award-winning publisher, Mr. Julian Assange. I would like to say a huge thank you to our distinguished speakers who have graciously accepted our invitation to share their insights and experiences. I know that David McBride and John Shipton have journeyed a long way to be with us here today, and for that we are very grateful. Each of our speakers today plays a significant role in championing whistleblowers, defending our democratic right to know, and shedding light on critical issues that affect our society, such as human rights, war crimes, free speech, and the freedom for us to get information. I want you to imagine what our democratic societies would look like without whistleblowers. The whistleblowers, the truth tellers, the people that are willing to stand alone and to speak up against the wrongdoings of powerful organisations, corporates and governments. The people that, with an understanding of the possible consequences, risk their livelihoods or freedom and put themselves in the firing line for mockery, defamation and even prison, all for the greater good and the service of people like us. We need to commend these brave people who put integrity and humanity first. We need to rally behind them, support them, protect them from the gross underbelly of our society that has manifested unchecked in the darkest corners of power. So we are here in solidarity to say we will not allow our democracy to be undone by weak humans, those who are afraid to stand up to bullies, tyrants and injustice. We stand with the whistleblowers, the truth tellers, so we can fix what is broken, not walk blindly into a future that is built on corruption and lies. I am reminded of the words of Niles Melzer, the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, who said, "Whistleblowers should be celebrated as heroes, as they take enormous personal risks to safeguard the public interest and uphold our democratic values." If you have the opportunity, I would encourage all of you to read The Trial of Julian Assange by Niles Melzer. It is an incredible, insightful book that absolutely goes through everything of the persecution of Julian Assange. So these words capture the essence of our gathering here today. as we celebrate World Whistleblowers Day 2023. We are privileged to have with us here today the fearless David McBride, whose unwavering determination to expose governmental wrongdoings has and continues to inspire all of us. David's actions remind us of the power of the single voice in pursuit of the truth. Thank you, David. Once again, I express my gratitude to all of you for joining us here today. Your presence and your support inspire not only our speakers, but also contribute to the growing movement for transparency, accountability, and the protection of whistleblowers and journalists everywhere. And it's because of people like you and the movement that we're building together, it's the only way we can reclaim and build our democratic values together. Thank you. One of the global organisations that is at the forefront of this fight is Amnesty International. It must be said though, these organisations are only as strong as the conviction of their members. So joining Amnesty and having your voice heard is very important in affecting positive change in whatever you feel strongly about. We are lucky today to have Tim Green, the President of Amnesty International, to speak here today. Give him a warm welcome, Tim Green.
Thanks, Jody. Inspiring words as always. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on the unceded land of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. While we're here thinking about people putting themselves at risk to speak out against abuses of power and raise awareness of injustice, we cannot forget that this has been the reality of First Nation people in Australia for generations. We are privileged here to have some amazing advocates to speak to us today. So I will try and keep my point short. All of the work that is done by Amnesty is based on the belief that people, as individuals or a group, can challenge injustice and make positive change in the world. Whistleblowers like Julian Assange, David McBride, and Richard Boyle are excellent examples of this belief. Without people courageously bringing human rights abuses to light, these injustices will continue. As such, it is vital that whistleblowers are protected under Australian law and that we support those who speak out. Specifically, I'd really like to highlight the work done by Adelaide for Assange in meeting for protests out front side of Penny Walton's office every Tuesday. Their work in bringing the injustices committed against Julian Assange to light is invaluable and deeply appreciated by Amnesty nationally. And I would like to, anyone who isn't involved, get involved. It's a great cause. I will leave it there because we're a little bit over time, I believe. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim. We really appreciate it. And like I'd said before, organisations like Amnesty are just as strong. They are as strong as the people that build the movement. So if you are passionate about something in like free speech, please join Amnesty International or other like-minded groups. It is now my pleasure to introduce a man of courage and unwavering determination. In the face of immense challenges, David has stood strong, exposing hidden truths with a shining light on Australia's response to the treatment of whistleblowers. You're right, Frank? You can go first. Yeah, come on, David. Ring up. I'm going to just let you speak now, David. David McBride, everyone. Woo, make some noise. Thank you for coming all this way. It's not whistleblower standing. We're here because of you, David. Thank you.
Shall I hold it? Thank you so much. Thanks for having good sound. Thank you for everybody for being here today. Happy World Whistleblowers Day. It is great, and you can be happy. You can be happy. Are we going to win? Yes! Are we going to win? Yes! Are we going to win? Yes! We are going to win. We are going to win, and that's a reason for everybody to be happy here today. In 20, 40, 60 years' time, you will be proud that you stood up. There's a lot of tough things about being a whistleblower. You know, I'd advise people that the government will crush you, you'll be put in jail, your marriage will fail, all of those things. We strive for various things in life. All of us like, you know, nice things, nice cars, nice houses, but most of us, we realise eventually that it doesn't really do it. There's a few things in life that really do it. Children do it. Really, really good friendships do it. But standing up in the face of corruption and unsurmountable odds is something you can be very proud of. It is something that you can take to your grave and say, when the question was asked of me, I stood up and I did my duty. Of course, the government will say, I'm not the right kind of whistleblower. And it's kind of funny, Mark Dreyfus has become such a comic figure now. He's got this complicated system about how whistleblowers can be the right type of whistleblower. Now, he's got, you know, lots of degrees. He's a King's Counsel. Oh, very, very, very smart man. Now, let's see if you people can work out. I bet you won't be able to work out what the right type of whistleblower is. A whistleblower that says corporals are bad. Yeah, he's probably the right type of whistleblower. Now, do you think a whistleblower who says generals and politicians bad, do you reckon he's a good whistleblower or a bad whistleblower, according to Dreyfus? It's pathetic, isn't it? If you're a whistleblower against the government, you're a criminal. But if you're a whistleblower against the government enemies, oh, you're a fantastic person. Isn't it pathetic? Mark Dreyfus, you are pathetic. And it's terrible to think this is a man. You have to pass quite hard ethics exams to become a barrister. I failed, actually. I failed twice. And you've got to, because there's masters of case law and all sorts of, you know, regulations you've got to know off by heart. Now, Dreyfus passed them, obviously. He didn't just pass them, but he became a King's Counsel. So here's a man that knows a little bit about truth. Now, he must be such a phony if he's putting people in jail saying, oh, even though they've exposed crime, even though they've exposed murders, rapes of children, they didn't report to the right whistleblower delegate, so I'm going to put them in jail. You know, he's a pathetic man if he thinks that whistleblower protections are okay, even though I'm going to jail, even though they think Julian Assange is bad, they think Richard Boyle is bad, but they've got a brochure printed by PricewaterhouseCoopers, no doubt, that says, oh, we love whistleblowers. The fact is they don't. The fact is they're likely to put me in jail. Even though the law supports me, they're going to put me in jail because the idiots from ASIO and ACIS are going to be in the courtroom and they're going to say any evidence which supports my argument that the leadership of the Defence Force knew about the war crimes and tried to cover them up by putting decent soldiers in jail. Anything that I tried to bring up, they'll say, oh, that's national security.
Shame!
Yeah, exactly. It's a shame. It's a shame. The people that run our country, the idiots from ASIO, the idiots from ACES, they are fools. They are beholden to the United States. We can't protect our sovereignty by giving up our sovereignty. It's an absolute disgrace that we have been sold out to the Americans. A country, and if you only knew one thing about America, and it was Julian Assange's case, you know everything about America. That a man who exposed that they had committed murders, covered up murders, basically behaved in a completely criminal fashion, along with a lot of other countries. They are going to put him in jail, they're going to kill him, okay? And they think that's all right, you know. That tells you everything we need to know about the country that runs us. And as for Albo, I think his best excuse would be, oh, I can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about it. The Americans are too powerful. It's pathetic. You can do something about it. You can do something about it. But he won't, because he's too scared. And that's pathetic. Dreyfus can do something about it, but he won't. You know that the politicians can actually sack the head of ASIO, they can sack the head of ACES, but they won't. They won't do it, and they'll put me in jail. They'll put me in jail forever. I've got 2 children, I'll see them spend the rest of their lives without a father. They'll do that. Yet they won't stand up for Australia. They won't stand up for Julian Assange. They won't stand up for me or Richard Boyd. World Whistleblower Day, you know, it's the fact that Daniel Ellsberg died this week is very important. You know, no one in their right mind doesn't think Daniel Ellsberg is a hero. He wasn't actually acquitted by the United States. The only reason he didn't go to jail was because the Nixon administration committed so many incredible criminal breaches that the case was thrown out. But that shows you, Ellsberg was still a criminal according to the American. Julian Assange is just like Ellsberg. There's no difference. Julian Assange and Ellsberg are the same. And if Ellsberg's a hero, Julian Assange is a hero. And they were friends, go figure. But the one thing I need to say, I mean, I'm not a hero in the sense all I did was my job. It's pretty disgraceful to think how many people didn't do their jobs. But you are the heroes. You are the heroes because whistleblowers die without support. And you can be so proud of yourselves that you stood up. We are the minority, as I always say, you are the beautiful, strong minority, and everyone will want to be you in years to come, pretend that they were here. Don't be worried that there's only, a few hundred of us here today. That's always been the case. When anything really good has been achieved in society, it's been by a small minority who just said no. And that is you. I'm so proud to be here. I've never liked myself more. I've never been prouder to be an Australian. And that's thanks to you. That's thanks to the people that know what's what and are prepared to stand up and are prepared to get abuse. It's what makes this country great. I'm very, very proud of everybody here, and I'm very, very grateful to the support I have. We are going to win this because we're right. They might put me in jail, but I'll be let out after a couple of years, and those who put me in jail will be looked upon like Richard Nixon is now. And Ellsberg, and we will be the ones who laugh, and you will be the ones who will be there with me on the prison steps or the courthouse steps, whichever it is, because we will win this because we are right. It can never be a crime to report a crime, and that's the fact.
subscribe people. Thanks for gracing us with your presence. Amazing. Our next speaker needs no introduction to the local Adelaide activists, Mr. Frank Pangallo. Frank has a strong journalistic background and is a member of the LA Legislative Council. His commitment to free speech, free press and the support of whistleblowers has contributed more to SA Parliament than anyone. Personally, Frank is a great support and encourages the activist movement in Adelaide, and for that I personally thank him. Make some noise for Frank Pangallo.
Thank you for coming, everybody. I just want to acknowledge my parliamentary colleague, the Honourable Robert Sims from the Greens. Greens have been an immense support for what we've been trying to do to get some justice for Julian. I'd like to thank David for taking the time to come to Adelaide again. And we also are fortunate to have Julian's dad here today, John Shipton. John has been now doing a campaign around the world to open the eyes of various governments and others willing to listen about the injustices that have been committed against his son Julian. Yes, it is a small movement at this point, but it's a very effective movement because people will not and refuse to be silenced when it comes to outing the wrongs that are going on in our communities. It's our democratic right to speak up about human rights injustices, miscarriages of justices, and also crimes that are committed by corrupt governments. And that's what Julian Assange has done. He has spoken out and exposed horrendous war crimes. And it's hypocritical when you get the Americans pointing the finger at the Russians for what they're doing in the Ukraine, accusing them of war crimes, when they're just as guilty themselves of what they're doing. And then when somebody tries to expose that wrongdoing, they throw them in jail or just try and nullify them, and even to the point of trying to take their lives. And that is something that is unacceptable. Today is Whistleblowers Day, of course, and whistleblowers are like Julian Assange and David McBride and Richard Boyle and others before them, Daniel Ellsberg. There have been so many others that have opened the public's eyes to corruption that exists. And when you try and open eyes to government corruption, the government will come after you. And they will. And as David has pointed out, and he's experiencing it himself, they'll try and crush you. They'll try and crush your reasons for being around here and trying to destroy your entire reputations. And it's no different in anywhere you go. I'm experiencing it, I've experienced it. When you speak up, they'll come after you. But nonetheless, you have to speak out, you have to stand up for what is right. Whistleblowing isn't a crime. It can never be a crime. The majority of Australians accept that whistleblowing is essential in the democratic process, and they support whistleblowers. Unfortunately, governments don't. All you'll get is lip service from governments who say and like you to think that they support whistleblowers, but they don't. We know that they don't. We know that in the past there have been committee recommendations, there have been reports into whistleblowing saying what the governments should do, but they are always reluctant to act and do something. Because governments, once the governments are in power, they want to protect that power, and they will stomp on anybody that tries to threaten that at all. So what we need in this country is proper whistleblowing laws that protect whistleblowers, and an agency that is set up to ensure that whistleblowers are able to come forward and not be threatened with jail and other penalties just because they've exposed some wrongdoing. We need that. That's the important thing. We need governments to act and do that. As I've often said to Jody here, who's done a fantastic job in exposing what's been going on and also promoting the movement to free Julian. There are times that she gets a bit downhearted, and I say to her, never get downhearted. Never think you're losing, because you won't lose. It all begins with a small crack, right? The movement, and then those cracks widen. And then the water will just go through and you'll win. And you'll win your cause. This cause is the right cause, and your presence, your voices will be heard, and you just continue to do that. As for the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, just weaselly words about Julian and others in his position. He keeps saying enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough of what? We've heard you say that so many times. You need to act on it, Prime Minister. The Foreign Minister needs to act on it, not show that they are lapdogs for the United States. Thank you all for coming here. We need to continue the support that we've shown for people like Julian and other whistleblowers in our community, for people like David. We won't be silenced. We'll continue to fight for them. I want to thank Mr. Shipton for being here today. It's important that he is recognised for the work that he is doing along with others, and that he knows that he's got our strong support, and we'll continue to do that. So thank you for coming out today.
Please for the Stay Human project. That was excellent, thank you. Our next speaker is a dedicated defender of our democratic rights here in South Australia. The Greens Party are huge advocates for free speech and free press. Just recently, extreme laws passed here in South Australia to crack down on protests and public gatherings like ours. Robert Sims stands against this assault on our democratic rights. Robert is fighting to repeal these oppressive laws and preserve our right to peaceful protests. Please welcome Robert Sims.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you all for coming out to exercise your right to protest here in our democracy. Friends, it's a right that came under assault just 3 weeks ago here in this place, when Labor and the Liberals rammed through draconian laws to try and crack down on our right to protest. It was an outrage, and it was only the Greens and Frank and Connie from SA Best that stood up against this appalling attack on our democracy, and we're going to keep on fighting to try and overturn those laws. I want to thank you all for coming out here today and supporting this really important cause. I want to acknowledge the work of my parliamentary colleague, Frank Pangello. He is a fearless voice on these issues in State Parliament. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of former Senator Rex Patrick, who I know you're going to hear from today, who's been a really strong voice on this too. But it is so terrific to see such a broad cross-section of the community involved in fighting to protect the rights of whistleblowers. And thank you, David McBride, for your leadership, for your bravery. You know, you are really locked in a David and Goliath fight, and we respect you and the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. Friends, in our democracy, whistleblowers play a fundamental role. They're the canaries in the mine shaft. They're the people that bell the cat. They are exposing wrongdoing. They're standing up to big corporations. They're standing up to governments that are doing the wrong thing. They're calling out injustice. They are engaging in what is the ultimate just cause. And, you know, in our democracy at the moment, so many of the principles of our democracy are under attack. But fundamental is truth. That's something we have got to defend, and whistleblowers are playing a vital role in standing for truth. They are speaking truth to power and they need to be protected. And that's why this is such a core priority for the Greens. And in Canberra, my colleague Senator Hanson-Young has a bill before Parliament, the Media Freedoms Act. That would ensure that there's a contested warrants process where law enforcement would need to apply to a judge to search a media outlet or to access a journalist's metadata. The bill would also protect whistleblowers by introducing a public interest defence, and it would put the onus on prosecutors to disprove public interest rather than the journalists to prove it. And it would also have very strict shield laws to protect journalists to ensure they don't have to reveal their sources. This is something we're going to continue to push in the Parliament and know that we stand with you in this important campaign. Thanks everybody.
Thank you very much, Robin. In South Australia, we are so lucky to have strong men and strong women doing great work with integrity. Strong men like Rex Patrick, a transparency crusader and former senator who has dedicated his efforts to exposing systematic wrongdoings and advocating for stronger whistleblower protections. Rex's work exemplifies the importance of holding those in power to account. Thank you very much, Rex.
Thank you very much, Jodie. I stand here today actually as a whistleblower. I don't know if people remember, but about 8 or 9 years ago, I actually blew the whistle on the French contractor naval group for a lapse in security. It made the headlines across the Australian newspapers, French and Indian newspapers, and as a result of that, I was pursued by government. Luckily, I worked for a man named Nick Xenophon, who basically stood in the way of anything that was directed at me. In the end, the worst thing that the government ended up being able to do to me was to remove my security clearance. So just understand that I revealed a security breach in a major contractor, and for that I lost my security clearance. That's the strange way that things work. Just also feeding off what David said about the Attorney General. I'll just let you know on Monday I'm in the federal court. There's a case that I've launched against the Attorney General. What I'm trying to do is stop the government or stop a situation where, in my case, I asked for Christian Porter's report to Scott Morrison on sports frauds, and when Christian Porter resigned and Maccabi and Cash took over, the government said, we don't have the document anymore. And the law at the moment basically says that's okay. And so on Monday we're in the court with the Attorney General as the respondent, trying to change that law so that ministers can't sweep their dirt underneath the carpet. Now the irony of all of this is the very document that I'm seeking access to is a document that Mark Dreyfus publicly called for, and it's in a press release, it's still online. He called for its release. And so now I'm finding myself in court, now trying to get access to a document that the respondent once said should be made public. And that just gives you an example of what happens when you go from being perhaps in opposition to being in power. Somehow your judgment gets clouded by things. In relation to whistleblowers, we've seen, I personally talked to Mark Dreyfus about Richard Boyle when he was in opposition. He was very interested, and actually I did some work with him on it. And yet we find that he's now in government and he's effectively turned his back on Richard, allowing a system that he knows is broken. We know that he knows it's broken because he's introduced legislation to try and fix it. But that's okay. He's going to let people like Richard and David pay a price for doing the right thing. This morning I was talking to a whistleblower in New South Wales, someone I'm helping with access to information from the New South Wales government. And the ABC were working with this whistleblower to try and expose a corruption inside the New South Wales health system. And sadly, they've had to pull out of exposing that because of the ruling in Richard Boyle's case. So we have a court case here in South Australia that has now effectively removed protections, or certainly doesn't guarantee any protections for whistleblowers. So the situation, if you haven't read the Richard Boyle case, in summary what it says is that Richard, whilst he was gathering information to be able to properly ground a public interest disclosure, he did something that was unlawful, and the court says that's not okay. So you can watch things going around you that are wrong. When you try and get some evidence, pull some evidence together, if you don't strictly comply with the law, you can get prosecuted. And that's exactly what is happening to him. We have to protect our whistleblowers. We have to protect them because we have a whole bunch of oversight mechanisms. We have the Senate, for example, that conducts Senate estimates. We have the judiciary, if you can afford it, that can hold the government to account. We have the Auditor General. We have a whole bunch of organisations that are designed to try and keep the government in check. But there's nothing better than someone on the inside being able to observe something that is wrong and then calling it out. But what's even better, and I used to remark when I did Senate estimates, everyone used to say, geez, that was 3 or 4 days of pretty intense stuff. But the really good thing about Senate estimates is we know that when people go back to their offices, they think to themselves when they're making decisions and when they're engaging in the conduct that they are for government, they know that they might get asked a question at estimates. And that's the power of that oversight, not the 3 or 4 days where witnesses are appearing, but just the idea that people will behave properly because there's a chance they'll get caught out. And it's the same for whistleblowers. If you know there are people around you that may call you out and are well protected in doing so, it prevents corruption, it prevents misfeasance and malfeasance and maladministration. And that's the important thing that we miss out on here. We often focus on the individuals, and of course we need to think about Assange and David and people like Richard Boyle. But it's the principle that if we've got strong whistleblower laws, it acts as a preventative. It acts as a deterrent for people who might be prepared to otherwise engage in misconduct. I'll wrap it up here, but just before I do, I will say something just to make people aware. David raised this. We know that in relation to the crimes that took place alleged crimes that took place in Afghanistan that David called out, we know that there was a carve-out for senior officers. The Chief of Defence Force has just done a command accountability review on all of the officers that were high in the chain, including a review that he did on himself. If you go and have a look at the Senate estimates transcripts, you'll see amazingly he thought that was a good idea, that he would mark his own homework, just check out and work out whether he had done the right thing. It just shows the lack of judgment. And the one good thing that we've seen come out over the last week or so from that Senate process is that Jackie Lambie has now made a referral to the Hague to have them deal with that senior command. So good on Jackie for doing that, but it's an indictment on our system that we didn't take that approach ourselves. That we didn't say, we recognise that wrong has occurred in Afghanistan. We recognise that the command are ultimately responsible for the conduct of the troops. We can't just say it's the diggers that have to pay here. We've got to make sure that accountability works its way right to the very top. And so there is some hope there that we might get some accountability in relation to that. Sadly, it's because Jackie Labby's gone to The Hague to do it, not because the government has willingly sought to hold these officers to account. We've got to improve the system, we've got to make things better. These events are important. The work of all of the whistleblowers we must acknowledge, and we have to protect them.
Thank you very much, Rex. Now we have a poetry reading by Juan Guerrero. If Juan would like to come up. Big round of applause for Juan.
I want to acknowledge I stand in Ghana land. Also, I was a political prisoner in Chile, and we fight and we resist for freedom. And the United States with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger killed my president and killed so many of our people in exile and put them in prison and torture them. So we know what is the United States and CIA doing for the good of our people in all Latin America. Shame! That's why my poetry stands with the whistleblower, especially Julian Assange. An ode to misery of this last night. We live in an age which is so possessed by demons that soon we should only be able to do goodness. The soul is a lake that goes dry in the middle of winter, inhabited so much melancholy of the last night. On the screen, the window of unhappiness, I see Julian Assange transferred to a prison hospital. The truth comes to us from prison and the difficult moments, as from Bobby's son on his days of hunger strike, covered only with a blanket, as from Victor Jara in the National Stadium of Chile, and his body ripped and hand broken by the police and military. Julian Assange sentenced to death by the liar of power, riddled with the apathy of our conscience. Augusto Pinochet relieved by the House of Law, by agreement of Tony Blair and Jack Straw in March 2000. Those on the other screen had not yet read Frank Kafka. Viva Julian Assange! Freedom for Julian Assange!
Thank you, Juan. Okay. So our special guest speaker today needs no introduction. His steadfast support and dedicated efforts to defend his son, John Shipton, has inspired people to stand up against injustice and defend free speech. John tirelessly travels around the globe, meeting thousands of people and winning hearts with his messages of hope and love. He has shown us the power of one person's unwavering belief to inspire a movement, encouraging individuals to unite in the pursuit of justice and to free Australian Julian Assange. Please join me for a warm Adelaide welcome, Mr. John Shipton.
we've been fighting this fight and gathered here again in Adelaide. It's heartlifting. Just let's start with one thing. Just a moment's silence to thank the whistleblowers, Boyle, McBride, Assange. Here, the preeminent document of the 20th century, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, written by Herbert V. Evatt, an Australian. What mother's milk in the culture produces such extraordinary men and women? The veneration of our heroes, of our men and women, is the most important thing we can do to solidify the sovereignty of our society and our nation. To venerate them. They are men and they are women, so they have flaws. But to acknowledge McBride, acknowledge Assange, Pilger, Burchett, the list is long and inclusive, and it's created by the mother's milk, I call it the mother's milk, of the culture, the ground upon which we live and stand, animated in spirit and blood, is us. So we start there, and we understand the fullness and the beauty of this culture, and we venerate those that manifest the culture. Donald Dunstan, for one, long forgotten now, but not forgotten by me. There are many. Rex Patrick. To go to the other side, in 1973, the Conventions of Asylum were ratified by the United Nations General Assembly, brought there by Australia. The second most important document of the 20th century. We understand that occasionally states get out of hand. They become insecure, and they think that their security lies in oppression. And we understand this, so we have the Conventions of Asylum. We give asylum, we embrace those who are put upon, and we take them to our hearts and give them assistance. That assistance was offered by Ecuador to Julian Assange. They took him in and protected him against Sweden, against United Kingdom, against United States. That little nation protected him. And shamefully, against Australia. It's 14 years. 14 years. It's inescapable in its import as it strikes the mind and heart. 14 years. 5 governments, 5 prime ministers, 5 foreign ministers. The current foreign minister takes up that shameful wreath and wears it and says, oh, it's the law, it's a matter of the law. When all of us know that it's a political persecution and has every element of a political persecution as a consequence. Rafael Correa of Ecuador gave Julian asylum. Now, asylum's not something that you go and get in the Wheaties, you know. It's a process that you go through and you're evaluated. and you are offered asylum. To remove asylum is equally the same process. That process is not dragging Julian Assange out of the embassy. That's not a process, that's a brutality. I feel that I should give Foreign Minister Wong a little bit of a hurry along. Instead of exposing her Prime Minister by her silence to the obloquy of failure to get Julian out of jail. What is she planning? A Prime Ministership for herself? It's worth a thought or two that Paul Keating's comment on Minister Wong was that she'll have to make up her mind one way or the other. She'll have to be something, for it says in the Bible, the warning, you are neither this nor that, and I spit you from my mouth. Anyway, that's enough on Penny. She was very warm to me personally, so I give thanks for that. I end with, again, the realisation that without whistleblowers, this is very important. You might have years ago read of frequently wedding parties being blown up, or funeral cortèges destroyed, or gatherings for a celebration in Waziristan. It is in Pakistan, the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Those targeting procedures were revealed in the publication of WikiLeaks. They targeted those groups of people, knowing that if you murder children, you pacify a society. They know this. It's not accidental. They have anthropologists and psychologists. The two psychologists who are head of the Psychological Association of the United States were paid $40 million each to investigate and review the torture practices to make them better. So the whistleblower brought an end and brought reform to a procedure that the states had wandered off the track. The whistleblowers actually contribute fully to the health of the societies. Without them, we'd be in the dark. We'd be wandering along thinking, oh, the government says this, it must be right. The government needs the corrections. It's vital to the health of government to have people review. Last thing, it may interest you, that if you know of a crime and you don't report it, I'll repeat that, if you know of a crime and you don't report it, it's an offence. It's called misprision, and you can be put in jail for 2 years. So we give thanks to McBride, to Boyle, and to Julian. And I think Pangella said that they'll come for you. Well, we've come for them. This movement now is worldwide and embraces. Just yesterday, Lula, the president of Brazil, was in Rome, sitting at a table and giving his speech, so to speak, an interview. The speech finished and an interview proceeded. And then he spent 2 minutes bringing to the notice of the dignitaries gathered there of the situation of Julian Assange. It's not lightweight any longer. President Obrador welcomes us in Mexico to the celebrations of independence. President of Chile, Belletti, says that Julian must be free. President of Colombia, Petro, says the same thing. The Bundestag votes that Julian be consideration of the Atlantic Council, the Atlantic Bridge they call it. The French Parliament debates for an hour whether to give Julian asylum out of an act of honour because he released an understanding that every contract over $200 million is reviewed by the NSA, and as a consequence those profits are stolen as an act of honour. And so it goes around the world, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
A huge big round of applause. Big round of applause. Well, that is the conclusion of our speakers today. I want to thank once again want to thank absolutely everybody for coming out today. This movement is nothing without every individual, and every action counts. If it's a like on Facebook, a share, a conversation, going to see your rally, going to a rally, going to join a group. We really need everybody's participation in our democracy. We can't just sit back anymore and wait for other people to do something, because our children, when they get to my age or our age, they will not know what hits them if we do not stand up now. We need more whistleblowers, we need more people to protect and to stand by them. Now, just before we go, we do want a photograph, so if we can get everybody in front of me on the steps, and if we can get John Shipton, David McBride, and any other speakers that are left here just to stand at the front, that would be fantastic. While that's all happening, while everybody's pushing